Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the causes of war. Now, there have been a few videos floating around that were in the stage in the world today where the conditions, some are alleging, the conditions for a major conflict, if not a world war, are in place. So it's all we're needing now is again, so it's alleged is a flashpoint, and that'll be it. Then it'll have a chain reaction effect of igniting military passions and adventurism all over the world, or in many places in the world. Now, I'm not sure. I suppose it's possible, but I don't really see those conditions. And there are various references made to, well, World War I only started because some activist shot some guy, and that was it, and that was all it took. And then, but that's a misrepresentation of the reality of the times. So I'll use World War I and then have a look at World War II and even the Korean War as examples, and then we can sort of put some perspective to this. Now, some of the causes, when historians look back, they don't see a primary cause at the time, because you're looking forward and you're in the current moment. Looking backwards 20, 30 years later, you say, well, it's obvious that Napoleon Bonaparte this or so-and-so that, Hitler this, it's obvious. But it's very, very different when you're in the moment and you're looking, in the moment and looking forward. Then it's a different matter altogether. And if you look at a lot of the people, even in World War II and World War I, it was inconceivable that a major conflict could break out, but it did. Now, I just want to go through World War I now. The flashpoint was the Balkans, and the Balkans, that's Croatia and Serbia and northern Greece and those those places around there. That's the Balkans, and it's been a flashpoint for thousands of years. 2,000 years ago, the Roman emperors were lamenting what a troublesome place the Balkans was. So it's not like it's a recent thing that it's been a troublesome area. So I just want to go back in the history now. That the Balkans was really part of the wider Eastern Roman Empire for quite some years, actually. And when the Ottoman Turks, the Turkish Empire, which is called the Ottoman Empire, when they started expanding out of in sort of the 1450s, they started expanding out of the Middle East. They ended up really putting an end to what had been the Eastern Roman Empire or its remaining vestiges. And they took over, invaded and took over that whole area of the Balkans, up to including Hungary, by the way. So they got quite a bit north there, and you can still see the Turkish look in some of the Hungarian nobility today. Now, they also twice nearly captured Vienna in Austria, and it was both times really. It was quite a close run thing that the Turks didn't do. Turks were experts at siege warfare. So anyway, the Turkish Ottoman Empire controlled most of the Balkans, and they gave all the best jobs and all they were quite brutal, and they gave all the best jobs to the Turkish goons and so on. Now, eventually, the local, including the Hungarians and the Romanians and the Bulgarians and the Serbs, they kicked the Ottomans out. The Ottoman Empire started to decline, and was under constant pressure from the Russians. A lot of disputed areas around Crimea and around the Caucasus Mountains and so on, which were disputed between the Turks and the Russians. So anyway, the Balkans then kicked the Turks out, and there was a lot of sympathy in Russia for these the people in the Balkans, fellow Slavs and that sort of thing. So there's a bit of kinship there, and the Russian aristocracy, or the the Romanov dynasty sort of declared themselves, if you like, the de facto protectors of Slavs in the Balkans. But it was an area that was rife with, again, it degenerated without the Turkish control or overall sort of top-down control. It degenerated into bickering tribes, and this unrest was seen as going two ways. Now, the Austro-Hungarians, and that was an integrated empire of Slavs and Germans and Hungarians or Magyars and so on. So they were very concerned about unrest in the Balkans, that it might spill over into the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was quite precariously sort of cobbled together. And so they had a huge interest in what was happening in the Balkans, as the Russians did as protectors of the Slavs. The Turks, who still had a presence, by the way, in Constantinople and Istanbul, or Istanbul as it was then called, they were also looking for opportunities to get back into the Balkans if there was any pretext of doing so. So it was still an area of turmoil and activism and petty nationalism, the Serbians and so on. So it was a place that was rife for dramas of all sorts, as indeed it was at the times of the Roman Empire. So this was an obvious flashpoint. Now, the Austro-Hungarians wanted to annex a few parts of parts of Croatia and this sort of thing. They wanted to annex those in order to calm them down and stop the activism and so on. Because a lot of activists coming out of Serbia that were going into Austro-Hungarian areas and stirring up trouble and printing pamphlets and trying to agitate for all sorts of things. There's going to be some fantastic Pan-Slavic League and which was all a pie in the sky. I mean, I don't think it'd ever come to it, but it was a good platform or launching pad for stirrers and activists and opportunists to just run around making trouble, which they were doing. So anyway, this was the issue in the Balkans. So it was tailor-made for a major drama. Now, rather than accept that's an area of constant turmoil, instead the Turks, the Austro-Hungarians, and the Russians all decided to deal themselves into the game, as much for political opportunism as anything else. But it meant that if anything happened there, that it would instantly erupt into at least a regional conflict at minimum. Now, looking at the rest of Europe, in 1871, Germany had federated. Now, before that, it had been Prussia with just another bunch of 30 plus, I think it was, German sort of states, regions, and principalities, and so on. So, and these areas would, the areas that were closest to France would often ally with France in a war or in military conflict. Those that were closest to Russia would sometimes ally with, so it wasn't like it was a homogenous German nation or group of German-speaking people. Far from it, in fact. Now, what started to happen, I guess, in the 1840s onwards was a sense of nationalism and German kinship. And the Russians, Chancellor Bismarck being a big player in this, capitalized on that. And then Germany, after a war with Austria and then France, federated and became the German nation. Now, the Austrians saw themselves as being, if you like, one of the prime movers in the German-speaking, arena, and so they didn't want a federated Germany because that minimised their influence in amongst the German states. The French didn't want a federated Germany because then that would have been more powerful than France, and France was still the most powerful continental nation at the time. But once Germany federated, it completely changed the power balance in Europe. So Prussia went from being a middle-level power of no real grave threat to anybody to suddenly Germany was being a federated Germany now had the biggest economy in Europe and also the largest population in Europe. So suddenly it went from France being very clearly the premier power, with Austro-Hungary coming sort of quite a distant second, really. And then in third place, places like Prussia, or even the newly federated Italy. Then that changed. So the power balance changed dramatically once Germany federated. Again, the biggest economy and the biggest population, and they'd recently defeated both Austria and France in a war. So this changed the balance of power, which had everybody rather concerned. Now, at around that time, a rather frightened Britain, because Germany had double the population of Britain. Germany started making announcements that they were going to build a world-class navy, and that scared the pants out of the British. And so the British started making overtures to the French and saying, look, I know we haven't got on too good in the past, but we really need to get together here, because if we don't, Germany will dominate the European continent, and we'll all be vassals of the German state. And so this created a lot of tension and concern in Britain and France, rightly so, by the way, or you can understand it at least. So they decided to cozy up, and to the newly federated Germany, they felt they had a place as they think, well, we are the number one guys in Europe. Let's not pretend that we're not. We are. We've got the biggest economy, the biggest population, the fastest growing economy. So we are number one in Europe. So let's just, the rest of you guys have to get used to that and adjust to it. And so they were understandably peeved that the French and the British wanted to keep Germany in its place as if it was still Prussia, and not now, again, the biggest player in Europe. So the Germans were rather put out by that, and thought, hey, you show us some fucking respect, you damn motherfuckers. So there was very much that attitude. Austria-Hungary believed that their continued existence was very tenuous. The only way they could exist was to stop and put a complete end to that Slavic nationalism stuff that was going on in the Balkans, against Serbia and those sort of places. So each now was on course to be in conflict with another. Was anyone intending that there would be a conflict? Well, no. But now the final sort of bit was that when that Gavrilo Princip shot the Archduke, which again was a close run thing. His advisors wanted him to wear this bulletproof vest, which was kind of made out of multi layers of silk and so on. Wanted to put this bulletproof vest on, but he wouldn't have it. So if he put that on, maybe the war wouldn't have happened, or certainly not happened in that timing and in that way. But anyway, this activist too. And if you look at the guy, photograph the guy, he's this low IQ sort of moron who's been sucked into it by not even aware of what he's doing. He shoots this dude, just sets off the war, like as if that would have changed anything anyway by shooting this guy. But so the Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria gets shot by this nobody activist. And the Austrians then say, well, here's our golden opportunity to slap those Slavic motherfuckers around. So we'll just give them untenable terms. Now the Serbians, quite aware of the possible consequences of if they were difficult to get on with, they gave actually quite a conciliatory response. They were clearly wanting to avoid conflict and wanting to at least appear to be taking some sort of responsibility for the shooting, but that's not what the Austrian government wanted. They wanted conflict. Give us what we want or else. And so they rather heavy-handedly saw this as an opportunity. This is our golden opportunity to stamp out the Slavic nationalism thing, or bring them all within an Austro-Hungarian orbit at least. And so they decided to get tough about it. The Russians said, no, you can't do that. We're protectors of the Slavs. And then the Germans said to the Russians, "Look, if you touch our Austro-Hungarian buddies, we're going to be at war with you." And so there was the conflict there. Then the British said, "Well, if you invade France going through Belgium or Holland, then we'll declare war on you." And on it went. So those are the links of so there's a lot of forces that were building up over time. The shooting was merely a flashpoint to forces that were building up over, at least 40 years, if not longer. And so this is something that needs to be understood. The war wasn't just something that happened in a day. It wasn't just that shooting. It was the shooting of the Archduke. It was much more than that. And the war, given that it ushered in war, especially war on that scale, it unleashes unimaginable forces that no one can control. And for the people who think they're in control or think they know how it's going to pan out, they don't. And it produces even the ancient Roman historians would make the point that war creates the most unexpected outcomes, and nothing like you expect the outcome to be occurs. It creates many social changes, economic changes, boundary lines, any number of changes are brought about by particularly major conflict. And World War One was no different. Now, World War Two is a little bit different. You've got sort of Britain and France wanting to maintain the status quo, a weakened and enfeebled Germany, which was part of the objective of really the first war, and that really was those forces that were building up over time, with Germany wanting to have its rightful place as the premier power in Europe, which again, by population and size of the economy, it was entitled to, and France and Britain wanting to maintain a status quo where Germany was not a major power, but again was an enfeebled sort of middle-rate power, and so the various devices put in place to keep Germany enfeebled, the Polish corridor, so that the northeastern Germany was separated from Germany by this strip of Polish land that was granted to Poland during or at the end of the First World War. Again, part of a device to enfeeble Germany, and the Germans wanted that sort of dealt with. So Naval Chamberlain from Britain did something sort of tactically, I don't know what you call it, brilliant or anything, but he sort of said to Hitler that I'm paraphrasing now, okay, we'll give way to what you want in Czechoslovakia, the state and land, and that's so we'll give way to that. But you've got to commit now that there are no other territorial requirements that you have in Europe, none. Now Hitler, rather foolishly, I think, agreed to that. And so when the following year Hitler went to the Polish government and said, look, this idea of northeastern Germany being separated from Germany by this Polish corridor, we need to discuss this, and because we want to integrate that part of Germany back in with Germany, so we need to have some conversations around that. And the Polish government said, no, get fucked, we're not going to discuss this with you. And then, okay, well, in that case, we'll take it by force, which the Germans were quite capable of doing at the time. And so the British rebels, well, Hitler signed this bit of paper, said he had no more thing, the lying bastard, we're going to declare war. And that was part of it. But the forces building up to this, in terms of not accepting Germany as a full member, if you like, of the major powers, and not accepting the right of German self-determination. That was something that always was going to rank. It was always going to be a problem, and they'd have been much smarter to address it and get it out the way and just accept that Germany is a major power. And there's nothing we can do to stop that now. And we look at sort of following World War II, within 15 years of the end of the war, and Germany's been bombed to smithereens. Within 15 years of the end of the war, the German economy was decently larger than that of Great Britain, which shows just how much engineering expertise and the size of the economy, the ability to produce high quality products, the level of education, so all these sorts of things combining that were again making even just West Germany, as it was at the time, was making it a global, economic and engineering industrial superpower, far exceeding that of Britain, and that was within 15 years of the end of the war, which shows that Britain was already a fast fading power at the time. Now, in terms of the causes of wars and conflicts generally, I don't see those similar things building up. Now, arguments can be made saying, well, that the Chinese have the aggressive, brutish Chinese government has a civilizational view of China or Greater China. So wherever Chinese have been, or wherever Chinese have gone over the last few thousand years, is really part of Greater China. So if they go and sort of force Taiwan or anywhere to be to show respect and to come back to the civilizational fold, as it were, if they have to use military means to do that, it's only because of those misguided idiots that are there who just don't realize how great China is and how powerful and how much they should be showing respect. And so there's a very civilizational attitude to the Chinese. So will they use military power to invade Taiwan? Well, quite possible. I mean, they talk tough about it, but it is a massive logistical exercise to do. If they were to land, get a few troops on the ground and the Taiwanese folded like a deck of cards, that might deliver it. But if there was anything involving sort of longer sustained and energetic resistance, I think they'd find it very, very difficult to pull it off. It would be a massive logistical exercise, and one where if the casualties started to mount, then the logistical machine to support it and continue it would be gone. They just wouldn't be able to do it. So I don't know. So I would think not. That if there's an attempt made, then it's likely to fail. America would have to just not do anything and just sit back and let it happen. And again, the Taiwanese fold like a deck of cards, then perhaps, but not otherwise. In terms of supposed Russian territorial ambitions, I don't think that, as far as I can tell, that there are any territorial ambitions by the Russians. The Black Sea port was, in Crimea was essential to Russian commerce, so that they wouldn't want that to fall into the hands of any government that was hostile to Russia. So that's a statement of the obvious and nothing to be surprised about. The idea of bringing Ukraine into NATO and using that as a device to annoy and irritate the Russians was there's nothing organic or natural about that. That was done deliberately to provoke Putin, which it did. So I don't see the Russians have territorial ambitions, and I think the use of Ukraine as a pawn in the international game is to try and punish Russia for not coming into the globalist fold. I think that's really what that's all about. I don't think it's got anything to do with territorial integrity or Ukrainian girls in bikinis with pistols that are holding off entire Russian armies blindfold and this sort of stuff, all that nonsense that comes out of it. So I don't see the conditions for conflict sort of there necessarily. In fact, I would doubt it. I don't see they've got territorial ambitions outside of that. Well, and certainly not anything they would see outside of we're doing this to protect ourselves. And there's certainly enough paranoia in the Russian psyche to see things that way. But I don't see territorial ambition in its most direct sense. Now, in terms of other things like Middle Eastern conflicts, the Middle East has again been a place of constantly shifting borders and conflicts since the beginning of time. The ancient Persian empires. So I don't see anything changing here. I think that's going to continue along the lines that it always has been, and it's only American hegemony that I think prevents continued discord there. Looking at Africa and the amount of failed states, I see a bigger threat to the world is the failed states. The failed state generally. I see that as a far bigger issue, particularly given the globalist maniacal desire to move as many third world peasant populations from the third world into the first world white West. And I think that encourages a failed state sort of rather than these people, and rather all the emphasis being put on trying to make those African states, as an example, successful and viable. Instead of that, the attitude is, if it fails, who cares? And then we'll just move all those miscreants over into the West, is more or less the globalists and the World Bank and World Economic Forum attitude. So I see actually the biggest threat to the world at the moment is the civilizational threat from vast numbers of people coming from the third world to the West, and then the West then becomes failed states. Just if you took all the people who want to get out of India and into the white countries, that is enough to make the entire Western world a failed state. Every Western world country would be a failed state just if you transfer the amount of Indians. Just that alone would turn it. So I see failed states as being the biggest threat, and also the most successful states today are being turned into failed states. So I don't see world war as the threat. I see the failed state issue as the biggest threat. You've been fantastic today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.